what is the church? And I might add in there, what is the church according to Jesus' vision? And how do we be that? How do we live that out today? Okay? And this is a hard topic. Seems like a pretty simple question. But to live it out anywhere near the high calling of Jesus Christ is very challenging. Again, I always go back to sitting around with the resurrected Jesus with just a few of them and him go, okay, guys, we're going after the nations. And we don't even know all their languages. Okay, how do we begin? Right? So that's the question before us, and we want to take it serious. So in other words, there's a couple books I just want to reference to right quick, and I'm going to read out of one of them. So one of them was written in 1998. One of them I think was written in 2003. The Missional Church, the subtitle being A Vision for the Sending of the Church in North America. And it's going to go through some history that's probably going to reveal to a lot of you guys like, oh, that's why this is that, and this is that, and this is that. And then it'll start going into their understanding at least. And again, I'm not saying like all the answers are in here, but at least there's a model. This is the first book I ever read in my life back in that time, around 1999, I think is when I read it. I was a pastor. I knew it was messed up. I remember talking to the senior pastor and going, so we all know the church ain't perfect. Yep, we all know the church ain't perfect. And we're not necessarily searching for utopia. Yep, we're not searching for utopia. We're never going to get to that. But do we think if the church is a building, do we think it just needs kind of like redecorated? Do we think like there's a major roof problem? Do we think there's problems with the walls? Or do we think the foundation is falling apart and the whole thing's about to collapse? And his answer to me was, I think we need to redecorate the church. My answer to him was, I think the foundation is cracked and irreplaceable. And that's when you realize, oh, we're looking at this differently. Right? And is he right? Am I right? What's right? Try to sort that out. But nevertheless, depending on how you're looking at a building is going to drastically change how you're going to approach that building. Right? One is looking at bulldozing the whole thing over and starting over and trying to figure this thing out. And the other one's just like, all right, let's get to painting. Okay? So, depending on how bad the problem is going to depend on how you might approach that problem. And again, there's no scientific way to say whatever. All I can say is this, is that if you read throughout church history from the book of Acts, the letters of Paul, the book of Revelation, all the way through church history, the people that God seems to raise up as leaders who seem to have a spiritual head on screwed straight feel like the church is in a pretty bad condition in their time. So that's kind of my feeling, and it's nothing new. So it's not like, oh, this has never happened before. It's like, no, this has pretty much been the way it's always been. And so now what do we do with that? And that, again, shapes our lens of what are we doing and how do we do it and all these kinds of things. So let me read. And then the other one is called The Shaping of Things to Come by Michael Frost and Alan Hirsch. And it's, again, getting into kind of a missional approach and a lot of these kinds of things. And if you're interested in that, you can read that. But let me read a little bit out of this book. So this was written in 1998. So 25 years ago. This group of scholars and pastors and different people, so several people wrote in this book and they kind of collaborated with it. Here's their take, and it's just a little snippet. The crisis are certainly many and complex. Many and complex. Diminishing numbers. Clergy burnout. Do you guys see diminishing numbers and clergy burnout today? Well, it was still going on back then too. The loss of the youth. How big was Brian and Kimberly's youth group back in the day? Like 400, 300? And in that same church, it's like a dozen. Like 25 years ago, they're already saying it. The loss of youth. The end of denominational loyalty. the biblical illiteracy, divisions in the ranks, the electronic church, interesting, 25 years ago, and its various corruptions, the irrelevance of the traditional forms of worship, the loss of genuine spirituality, meaning true Christ-likeness, and widespread confusion about both the purpose and the message of the Church of Jesus Christ. In other words, we don't know what the church is, nor the message of the gospel. Okay? Nothing new. Now listen to this. The typical North American response to our situation is to analyze the problem and find a solution. We're good Americans. We're well adapted to our culture. We got a problem. Let's put our heads together and fix it. These solutions tend to be methodological. All right, how are we going to do it? What's the proper method? What are the sciences telling us? They arrange all the components of the church landscape differently. And many assume that the problem can be solved or use the best demographics. Hey, so how many people are like this and how many people are like that? And use the best demographics or psychology or sociology insights, and one can redesign the church for success in our changing context. All it takes, it would seem, is money, talent, time, and commitment. And we will solve our problems. Now think about this. When you think about planting a church, well, we just need a new model. We just need some new methods. Well, we'll start meeting like this. Well, we'll start meeting like that. Well, we'll get a program. Well, that's what we're doing. Let me keep reading. Now, this was written 25 years ago. One should not be surprised that in this time of crisis, the megachurch, again, back then, that's kind of when that was taken off, appears to many as a successful enterprise in North American way to move the problem to solving the problem. No doubt we can learn much from the emergence and proliferation in non-traditional churches that now dot the margins of our urban centers. So once again, the church used to be in the center of our cities. Now the churches are on the outskirts of our cities. That's an interesting shift. The contrast between their success and the persistent malaise of traditional denominational churches sets in a high relief the crisis of the latter. Moreover, the vast array of programmatic and methodological solutions on the market today only underline the scope of the crisis. In other words, go to your Christian bookstore, and there are hundreds of books on all the how-tos of solving all the problems. And yet the problems only seem to be multiplying. Our knowledge seems to be increasing, but the problem is persisting and getting worse. Okay? The basic thesis of this book is that the answer to the crisis of the North American church will not be found at the level of method and problem solving. We share the conviction of a growing consensus of Christians in North America that the problem is much more deeply rooted. It has to do with who we are. We're not disciples. We're not actually disciples of Jesus. So no matter what method you use, where does it go? If I'm not filled with the Spirit, Christ-like, walking in His wisdom and love. We don't have that, so how can we fix the problem? Well, we can work around all this carnalness, can't we? All this non-discipleship stuff, that's too hard and long. Let's figure out a quick, easy solution. It has to do with who we are and what we are for. The real issues in the current crisis of the Christian church are spiritual and theological. By spiritual, they mean somebody who is truly filled with the Spirit and Christ-like. And theological meaning we truly have a biblical worldview and understanding of the gospel, of the church, of disciple making, and what we're being called to do and how to do it. Without that, where do you go? Okay, so 25 years ago, That for me, I knew there was major problems. I couldn't put my finger on it, and that book began to help me go, okay, this at least starts providing a little bit of framework for how do I move forward with this. Okay? So again, not all the answers or anything like that, but just a basis of understanding. All right, so I'm going to pass out a piece of paper. Couples are going to have to share. They're kind of a packet, if you will. I apologize. This probably would have been a little better well written, but I spent about 4 hours on it, and I lost it. So then I had to rewrite it. So it is what it is. No.
A little bit of both.
Hey, like I confessed earlier, I did that earlier this week as well. No, I got it. I'm not going to accuse anybody of stealing my copy. Now again, over the next several weeks, we're starting off big because we have to understand the vision of Jesus in the big terms, and then we're coming down to what are we going to commit to in the next year or so. Okay, we're going to get to the details, and I know some of you, it's like, I can only think past next week, so what are you talking about? And it hurts your brain, and it seems pointless or whatever. I understand that, but just bear with me, it's important. Because if we're going to enter into the vision of Jesus, we want to take that journey serious, because what if we're not actually approaching this right? What if we're not seeing it right? So we're going to give some serious effort. We still may mess it up some, but we're going to give it a serious effort. And we're starting with world history. What we've talked about in discipling people to faith. There's a creator. He created everything, including relationships. In other words, including the kind of the non-tangible things of our creation. Okay? And when you recognize them and you reverse engineer them, you begin to get insight into who God is and how He designed things. And then when you go to Scripture and you start comparing and contrasting these things, you start matching up some dots that maybe you can't before. So we're looking at world history in this way. We're matching up world history and church history. Okay? So when you go on the History Channel and you're watching history, what are you typically watching? Kings, rulers, warriors, and wars. Right? We look at history as basically a series of wars. That's most of history is like, well, there was this king, and then he came to power, and then this happened, and then there's another war, and then now this country is this country, and on it goes. Okay? And that's the world we've all come and grown up in. How did this affect the history of the church, and how do we look at church history? Church history is mirroring this. Church leaders come into power, and they begin to make moves. They begin to do things, and then there begins to be wars and splits and all kinds of stuff. And they're usually mirroring the cultural wars. So we got to understand what's happening here. There's a cultural war and a war in the world going on, and if the church is not careful, it just mirrors it. It just spiritualizes it. Okay? So why has the church split so many times? And is that good or bad? Was that actually the work of the Spirit doing something? Or was that man screwing it up? So when we ask the question, what was Jesus' intention? And again, nobody has to answer. It's a rhetorical question to think about. Did Jesus, when he started out, did he think, I'm going to start a church that's going to have one leadership, and then out of that's going to come others, and then this, like what did he envision? Or did he imagine these are going to be completely separate entities, they're going to operate different? How did he envision it? How do you understand that? And where do you get understanding on that topic? Both Bible and history. And I'm not answering it for you, at least not right away. So, if the church is a relational organism, which we talked about last week, birthed and sustained by the Spirit through the authority of Christ, where God the Father heals and restores all relationships, then we need to understand how this is to function. and the laws and principles involved. In Samuel, we have this story. I'm not going to go there, but I've listed it there, where the people say, we want a king like all the other nations. And of course, long story short, God tells Samuel, well, go tell him how that king is going to treat them if they get a king. And if you read it, money, power, and military. He's going to turn you into a military machine. He's going to turn you into a money machine because that's how nations run. Every nation that's ever existed, what do they focus on? Economics, military, and power. And if other things can come with it that are good, great. But these are how they operate. These are the kingdoms and the nations and the kings and the rulers of this world. But you're not to operate like that. But the church pretty quickly started operating like that. Okay? So who did they reject? Samuel? No. They rejected God as their king. And they rejected his ways of being a nation. He was going to create a nation that operated different, that was actually focused on relational healing in that group, which would then bring money and restoration and all the other ways. See, if you go after the money and the power and the military, and then you say, okay, well, we want people to get along. I mean, that's why we have laws, don't murder. Or you go the other way. We're going to restore and have loving relationships, and out of that will come prosperity. God's is reversed. God is focused on love and relationships and families. This is why he started with Abraham and his family when he wanted to raise up a nation. Not with power, money, all these things. Okay? So let's now consider how God has created mankind. He's created them man and wife. And these people are going to be in a covenant relationship. Adam and Eve is the start, but everything starts there. This is how God thinks. Now, this is very interesting. Relational, we talked about this. You can only have certain kind of relationships with so many people on so many levels, and it's got to have multi-layers. You're limited in your capacity. If I overextend myself in my relationships, I'm either hurting in relationships because I'm not really taking care of them, or I'm overburdened, or it just gets out of hand. And God has designed the woman to only have so many kids. Think about this. Because you can only be a father and a mother to so many kids. But man had a better idea. Let's have multiple wives. So I can get a lot of kids because that helps me with my military, my farming, my economics, my expansion, my kingdom. But that's not how God thinks. He's thinking, no, slow, small family, usually one child at a time, and a very limited amount. Because it's relationally based. It's based in love, in relationship, in covenant. This is how the whole world has come to be. Only the enemy and sin and mankind have distorted the marriage, so a lot of times when this is happening, it's attacked right out of the gate. Right? Even Jesus, born, immediately the king is sending somebody to kill him. Okay, that marriage, typically speaking, turns into a family. And that family now, you have certain roles. You have leaders, and you have children who are being raised by those leaders in loving, covenant relationship, and they're learning these relational dynamics. And they're growing in maturity under that authority and under that leadership. Honor thy father and thy mother. Okay? So, basically everybody living in a house together. What makes for a healthy family? How should these people relate to one another? What did God design by marriage to be one woman and one man? And again, this whole polygamy thing. Anyway, on and on and on. And ultimately, in our terminology, it kind of comes down to a span of control. A span of relational ability or equity. I've only got so much. And God has designed humanity in a certain way so that they have to be giving themselves relationally in this way. Then you have an extended family. Many times in ancient times it was called the patriarch. Today we might call them the grandparents. You have this larger family starting to develop. How is a family to function when the children are grown and have to start their own families? All of a sudden, the dynamics of leadership and authority and responsibility begin to shift and change. This is natural. We all have gone through this. Most of us, it's a lot of unhealthy changes and dynamics because we don't understand. We don't know the ways of God and all of this kind of stuff. And by the way, the Ten Commandments particularly were given to patriarchal people. While it applied in general terms to everybody, it was being given directly to the different family patriarchs. If you'll go back through the Ten Commandments, you'll notice the language. You cannot sleep with your neighbor's wife. That's not to women. That's not to children. And who can do that? You're not to envy their property and covet it. See, we're talking about now, I don't know, again, in our terms, it might be business to business, two tire shops next to each other. And the owners of each business, how should they treat one another? In competition? Or should they collaborate and love each other and let these two families do this together? How should they relate? And the Ten Commandments is sorting this out for them. Basically to try to keep from clan wars and all that. And the whole Old Testament's full of clan wars, family wars. We even have in our American culture the Hatfields and McCoys, these famous family wars. And then you see Paul in the New Testament church appointing Timothy to set up elders, patriarchs, overseers of the church. And how are they to function? And again, you have to look at it. He didn't start off that way. He came in, preached the gospel, people came to know Christ. He left, kind of whatever. All right, Timothy, I don't know if they've all lost their faith. Go find out if they're still going. Timothy pops in. Hey, man, they're still going. All right, keep working with them for a while. And then at some point, hey, this has grown to a point. We need to appoint oversight. Now, did Paul ever go, all right, we need to assign somebody to be over all of it? Did he do that? He did not. So notice what he does and what he doesn't do. This is when you're reading the Bible. What did God do and what did God not do? And what is the early church doing and what are they not doing? Nowhere will you find that God trusts anybody with that much power. And yet, pretty quickly, the church came up with this structure. So I was joking around about why are you not Catholic? I was foreshadowing this kind of conversation. Did Jesus intend one person to be the head elder of the entire church of the entire world? I don't believe he did. I don't think there's anything in Scripture that warrants such a thing. A very interesting thing in history. I'm going to jump here down. I'm going to jump to the next page right quick. I'm going to jump a little ahead to the church now. So, in the time of Constantine, which was right around the 300s into the whole 300 area of AD, he sends out a message to 1,800 bishops. Now, just stop and think about this. Why is the emperor of Rome sending out a letter or sending couriers, I don't know exactly how he did it, to 1,800, and again, the word bishop means elder, it's kind of a fluid thing, so just elder, bishop, somebody who is kind of a patriarch leader over a group of people who call themselves the church. So he was at least aware of 1,800 of them. Why didn't he just send a letter to one? Why didn't he send a letter to 10? Because he recognized and knew this is how it was structured. It wasn't to one. It wasn't to two. At this time, it was at least that he was aware of 1,800. And by the way, only 250 to 350 came. And 1,000 of them, of these invitations, were in the Eastern church, and 800 of them were in the Western church. The church was already kind of clearly divided. Very interesting. Okay? What's going on? In other words, what I'm trying to ask here is not just what man's doing. What is God doing? Christ is the Lord of his church. He's building it. He's guiding it. Where's the hand of Christ in all this? So in other words, just as physical families were set up, marriage, father and mother and kids, family, and then extended family, usually with a patriarch of some kind of helping to organize and oversee, but not be bearing and controlling, because each husband and wife are also unto themselves, right? Separate from mother and father, yada, yada. And then that's where it ends. He doesn't then go, okay, then we need a patriarch of patriarchs. And then we need an ultimate patriarch over all the patriarchs of patriarchs. It doesn't go there. Notice what it doesn't do. It goes to that level and it stops. And what it seems that the church did is it subsumed itself under its culture, Rome at the time, and they begin to go, maybe we're to be the universal worldwide church under one government. Because that's what Rome was seeking to do. And we're going to follow that pattern. And we're going to, by force, now at some point they start now sending out enforcers to come under the church, under this leadership. We're going to force other leaders, other churches that are led by patriarchs, to now come under this authority. Just like Rome was doing. Very interesting. In other words, we need to understand. Yes, question. Correct.
From the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that not actually accurate?
Again, you could see clearly in the book of Acts and throughout the deal there that nobody is operating at that level. Not even the people after Peter. So again, 325 AD, if it was operating like that, 300 years later, the emperor is sending out 1,800 letters. Not one. So he obviously believed there wasn't one pope leader. He thought, oh, there's all these littler leaders over all these different groups. And none of them are over authority over each other. Yet, they all know each other. There was unity, there was collaboration, but they understood the boundaries. Just like, again, I understand, at least I hope I do, the boundary that I now have with my son and daughter. I don't speak into their finances.
You used to.
I used to. Exactly. You see? Now, how we figure this all out and how we do this, again, there's some variables here. But there's also some non-variables. And if you start breaking the non-variables, it starts getting messy. Okay? So we need to understand what has been and what the mistakes were so we can ask ourselves, what are we doing? When we start planting churches, again, and I know we don't want to go there yet or whatever, but you have to understand where things can go so that how you start, you make sure you don't go the places you don't want to go. Okay? So if all of a sudden there's a group in Phoenix, all of a sudden there's a group in Arkansas, all of a sudden there's a group in Mexico, all of a sudden, what are we going to do? What's our leadership? Who has authority over what? How does this get decided? Who gets to decide it? These are important things. And you can see throughout church history, not only the Roman Catholic Church, but all the other variants. Then you get into the Protestant, and we get these denominations and how they operated and how they came up with whatever they came up with. Who's right, who's wrong? You're going to have to sort that out. What do you really believe? Okay. Why did the church move from local leadership to one universal leadership? Why would the church move from local leadership to national leadership? There's lots of Protestant churches that have done this. Or even international leadership. Right. Well, but yes, okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. You do need accountability. Lots of reasons. What are the right reasons? What are the intentions of Jesus? This is what we have to sort out. Okay. By the way, by the time, again, the emperor comes around and starts doing this, the church has spread far and wide. It's operating, I've listed off the eastern parts. Again, he sent 1,000 letters to the east. It's in India. It's in northern Africa. It's in Russia. It's probably maybe even as far as China. And then he sends 800 to the west. You're all familiar and you've come from the branch of the west. This is why you don't know anything about the church of the east. As Paul was the apostle to the west, who do you think was the apostle to the east? A lot of these churches, if you go to the older churches in all the east, who's the founder? Who will they cite? Thomas. Thomas is the apostle to the east. Almost all the eastern churches attribute the birth of their churches to Thomas. Thomas was known for certain to go as far as India, and there's many reports that there's an allusion that he made it as far as China and was planting churches and making disciples. Now, all the other disciples were also doing this, but evidently they weren't as effective, or they're not as attributed. Church groups and places don't attribute it to them. So it's kind of an interesting fact. So God, all through the Bible, does he speak to mankind as all of mankind? He doesn't usually do that, does he? How does he speak to them on the broadest level? Nations. He's going to judge this nation. Well, that's not fair. I'm sure there's some good people in there. Why is he going to judge them as a whole nation? And then other times, I'm going to judge this city. Well, that's not fair. Isn't there a variety in that city? You even get down into the sin of Achan in the book of Joshua, where one man sins and now he's going to judge the family. Interesting. Right, it is a sad story. Yes, even the little kids. Why is God operating like this? He's talking to them as nations. Where did these nations come from? Tower of Babel. And then he sets their boundaries. I'm going to now operate and relate to different nations. But I'm only going to relate personally and covenantally with one. Why is he doing this? And that nation doesn't start off as a nation. He could have picked a powerful nation, a plentiful nation, a numerous nation. No, he picks one man who's a Babylonian. Abraham. He starts with one man and one barren wife who's too old. Think about the contrast. This is how God thinks. And I'm going to bless you, and out of you are going to come kings. And out of you I'm going to bless you, that through you all the nations, all the individual people in the world. No, he didn't say that. He's operating in a certain way. He's thinking in a certain way. Through you, I'm going to bless all the nations. He sends the apostles. I'm going to send you to all the individuals around the world. No, he does not operate like that. He does not think this way. I'm going to send you to all the nations. You need to understand this if you're going to understand what the church is. And again, I can't even unpack it all in this moment. I'm giving you a big overview. So then you get down to, I'm going to go to page 3. Number 3, it says state or church in a providence. In the book of Acts, you see that some churches, the church in Asia, which was a providence, he talks to them like that too. He talks to them as nations. He talks to them as providences. He talks to them as cities. The church in the city of Corinth. And then he also talks to them like families. The churches that are in Corinth. So there's many families, yet one church, but they're all being led by different elders. And then there's churches of a whole region, and then there's churches of a nation, and then there's churches of the nations of the earth. You have to relate and understand this, and we're going to be a church that understands this and walks in this. It's very important. Changes a lot. It changes what you do with growth. It changes your perspective of how you're going to relate to the body of Christ. In other words, if a group of churches get together in Iran, and they're like, we're praying and we're worshiping, and somebody in there is like, or I don't know how it works, it could happen in a lot of different ways, but we think this guy and this wife is supposed to be missionaries in America. Yes, and we feel like the Lord is confirming this. And we're going to raise some funds for them to go to America. And I'm out here doing my thing in America, and I run across this couple. Hey, what's going on? And they tell they have an accent. God has sent us here as missionaries. Interesting. How am I going to relate to him? How am I going to see him? How am I going to determine that? Is this the Lord sending him? And if so, how do I relate to that? What do I do with that? Have you even thought about these things? Like, you need to think through these things. Okay? I'm not answering the question. So let me go back a little bit here. I'm going to go back again. Sorry, I keep jumping all over the place. Question on number 1 of now consider how the church functioned. What did we learn from the transition of the early church and how they handled growth up into the time of Constantine? And what we learned was they were oversaw by bishops until the time of Constantine, where soon thereafter they began to be viewed in a universal way where there was one head leader. Okay? Question.
Does that coincide with the church also
Yes, it develops into that, like the Church of England, right? This begins to get broken down. In other words, the church starts naturally refracturing itself because it's too top-heavy. Just like nations. How many nations have tried to rule the world? None have pulled it off. Interesting. It's as if there's a law in creation that resists it so much that nobody's able to do it, even when they try. Nope, we're not going to run it like that. And the church begins to splinter out of that, even though it was already splintered. There's a whole church in the East that's not even a part of the Roman Catholic Church. And it's bigger than the Roman Catholic Church. There's more people that are Christians in the East than in the West. But we don't know that. Interesting. Okay, so what did we learn? We learned that there was a shift there. The national church. What did we learn here? What did we learn from the great schism of 1054 AD? This is when the church officially split. Why? Because Rome had split. Rome split east and west, and so then the church split east and west. It was both a language barrier. You spoke Latin. The church spoke Latin in the west. They spoke Greek in the east. And so the church naturally couldn't hold together and split as two nations. As the nations split, so the church split. Interesting. Number 3, the state or church at a providence. What did we learn about the Reformation and the split that began to happen there? Was the Holy Spirit behind this? In other words, it's coming down to leadership, and it's coming down to a span of relational capacity. God doesn't want a nation, which we are the nation of God, to be structured non-relationally. And when you start building and building and building, it's no longer about relationship. It's about power. It's about control. It's about finances. It's about a lot of things. So God wants His church to be unified globally, but led locally, under His lordship. Okay? So in other words, if we were to see massive growth, we would need to quickly start letting go of all of that. We're not putting it under us. You need to understand this. Even when it comes down to a little house church growing and it's gotten to capacity, you all feel this, right? You can feel it. I'm losing relational connection. You can feel it. It's God created. So there's no magic number. Well, it's 5, it's 6, no, but it's relational, and when the relational strain gets strong enough, you need to discern it and go, we're getting too big. We need to get small again. How's God going to direct that? How are we going to do that? So that now we're coming back into relational connection again and remaining there. And yet, remaining unified. This is very important for a lot of reasons. Why is this book, and you all know this to be the case. If you don't know this, you can go talk to Romans 12, and they can tell you about it. Pastors and leaders of churches are all burnt out for the most part. There's all kinds of scandals that you don't know about. Lots of them. Why? Because they're in an unhealthy environment, leadership structure. If you get put in that thing, you too probably will fall. You too will experience burnout. You too will go under all these things. It's not them. It's the context of not being the church in the way Christ has called us to be the church. But I need all these people for this or for that reason, whatever I think the reasons are. And maybe I've fooled myself into thinking there's some good reasons. I've been in many large churches, medium-sized churches, and small churches, and when you get behind the scenes where people are talking honestly, it's really ugly. Really ugly. And it's very unhealthy, and those people are some of the most unhealthy people in the church. Okay? This is my experience. This is when I'm like, I think there's a crack in the foundation. Because I started seeing this everywhere I went. I was a part of regional conferences of pastors where things were talked about. And it wasn't 1, it wasn't 2, it was the majority. And in a more healthy, progressive movement of churches too. It wasn't like your old stuffy whatever. It was the vineyard. Okay. So what did we learn from the Protestant Reformation? What we learned is the church began to then split up and get into these smaller branches again. And leadership once again began to be dispersed. In fact, every time there was ever been a move of the Spirit in the church or in a place, leadership quickly gets dispersed. And then as the end of that movement or revival begins to come to a close, that leadership quickly culminates into one. Interesting. And the movement stops. Study church history. Again and again and again this happens. In the Assemblies of God, not to pick on them, because you could pick on them all. And again, we're a part of this. So this is not innocent us and all that, like we're a part of this. You're a part of the problem, I'm a part of the problem, we're all a part of the problem. Okay. Assemblies of God, the movement broke out, leadership began to be given to everybody, including Asians, blacks, whites, Italians, in a segregated time of America. And as the movement began to dissipate, the leadership from all those minority groups got taken away and given to the whites. This is what happened in the Assemblies of God. This is actually the Assemblies of God birthing. The other movement had a different name. I can't remember now off the top of my head. Okay, this is what's happening. We got to wake up to these realities. Okay? Same thing happened in the Wesleyan movement. I always tell Tiffany all the time, no matter how challenging it might get or how challenging people around you might be, I've never yet had a church member try to burn our house down. Wesley, on the other hand, did not get that luxury. So as he is equipping lay leaders, because they're not ordained and they're not, all through the proper channels, he started equipping regular men and women with the gospel and sending them out. And the church responded by trying to burn his house down. Interesting. Okay? So again, God sees cities, corporate wholes. He seems to judge them and see them as one thing. Why did God choose a city? Ultimately, he chose one city, Jerusalem. He also, by the way, what are you? You are the New Jerusalem. Hebrews tells us this. The church, is that on your list? Okay. New Jerusalem. Eli's starting to try to find all 95 that I mentioned. And he's coming up short and he's saying, I'm a liar.
I'm not 45.
Anyway, right. What have we learned from all the church splits within a city and the denominationalism that's birthed out of it? Why have these happened and why have they formed in the way they have? How has the Spirit actually worked in and through all of this? What would be wrong for a believer to simply go around to different churches within a city and partake or pick and choose people and ministries to be involved in? Go to a prayer group one night, worship group another night, study group another night, a service project another night, and just randomly do this in the church, in a city. What would be wrong with that? And just rhetorical question, think about it. In other words, there's a city church, but we know they're not all under the same leadership, are they? Interesting. Why is that? Is that the way Christ would want it? Is that man-made? Why is that the way it is? And how should you relate to it all? How should you function? How should you seek for unity? Where do you seek to correct and when you realize that's none of your business? And when the correction is needed, where's the strength of commitment and covenant and leadership to actually bring real correction? Or does there not any of that and we just all kind of look the other way and you got to work this out? Number 5, what I call leadership church, meaning a church group of people that all recognize the same leadership. All believers in or house churches who recognize certain people as their leaders or pastors or elders or whatever. We also see God seeing the church in this form too. And Paul seems to be focused on having Timothy set up leadership at this level and at this level only. Why? What is the church? And how are we to be it today? What have we learned from the millions of believers who do not submit to any church leadership? Amy, there's your question. How does church leadership submit their lives to the local church? How does that work? How does that function? Do we have that? Everyone shake their heads. We do not have that. We too are the problem. We too are to blame. And I can take full responsibility for it. And then you can get it down to the house church level. All believers that regularly gather, usually in the same place or the same house, a smaller group. Again, the Bible talks in terms like this. The church that met in their home, the church that met in their home. When the church meets in your home, all these kind of phrases. What have we learned from the millions of believers who see themselves and their little group as the pure church and separate themselves from the responsibility of the larger church? Why has this been the solution to the problem of the church for so many? Interesting questions. Why do so many leadership type churches break themselves down into smaller groups? Why did the church, this happened to probably 60, 70 years ago, all of a sudden there was an explosion of small groups. Some of you are a little older or more familiar. All of a sudden we need small groups. I don't know why, but there's some problems and we need a good method and let's do small groups. Now, those small groups are not churches. They're small groups. What verse is small groups? It's a good method. We learned it methodologically and sociologically from our universities. You need small groups. Wait a minute. You mean we can't just let them be house churches? Well, no, because then they won't tithe to us. Oh, they won't be under our authority. We're going to call them small groups. There's all kinds of things. Power, money. The church gets into it too, people. Because we're people. Okay? There's a span of control and a span of relational connection and ability that God has engineered and hardwired us all for. And that's why people just got to, I don't know what we're going to do or why we're going to do it, but we got to get smaller. Everybody seemed to think that was a good idea. And I'm not saying it was all bad. I just think it maybe should have been thought through a little more. And maybe they should have been little churches and seen as such and operate as such and keep the same vision as such and see how the Holy Spirit would move with them rather than small groups, which is an unbiblical concept, which kind of leaves you what? So I knew of a church where you had a small group that did bowling together, and you had a small group that, they like to knit, and you had a small, you had these affinity groups, these felt need groups. Well, there's a healing small group. There's the prayer small group. And now I like my little prayer small group, and really this is the church. Because I'm warm and fuzzy here. Oh, you mean when you call it a small group, you're distorting what the church is, and you're ripping from those people a concept that you have a responsibility to live out the vision of Jesus for the church. There's a lot of this going on. And then get down to maybe covenant community. Believers who share all things in common and submit their lives one to another in the fullest of ways. You see this throughout Scripture. You can't do that with everybody. Again, I operate one way. If I treat all women like I treat her, that's going to be a problem. If I treat this like all of yours, that's going to be a problem. You have to understand the relational dynamics that God has hardwired us with, and the church is that living organism sorting that out. So that if I'm born as an orphan and I hear the good news of how I can be totally made whole from all my broken relationships and all the sin that took place in all of that, I come into a covenant community. And I have a father, and I have a mother, and I have brothers and sisters who will take care of me financially and every other way. And we're a part of house church. And house church is part of a whole group of house churches that are under some form of leadership. And then that's where it ends. And you get much bigger than that, you need to start changing it up. But we don't like to do that because the money goes down and my control goes down and my popularity goes down, and now I'm an average Joe again. Joe. I think you're always ready for that when somebody uses that phrase.
Yeah, no way.
Exactly.
Is there anything about, it makes me think of when we started wanting to do a small group but not associate with the church necessarily. There was all this fear that you weren't going to have a spiritual covering.
Right.
And I just couldn't understand that.
I can't even begin to dive into all the issues that we've all faced. So you've all heard that. You need a spiritual covering. There's some truth in that, but there's also some falsehood in that. And what are we actually talking about? This is why I'm always saying, let's try as much as we can to try to use biblical language. Because it's always kind of interesting how it kind of gets really weird and twisted when we start using another word to kind of describe what's in the Bible, and then we use another word, and then we use another word, and then we don't even really know what we mean anymore by this thing out here. You need a spiritual covering. Okay, it sounds good. Like, okay, we need some covering. I like to be covered. Right? Hey, the husband is the priest of the home. Have you heard this one? Find that in the Bible. No, this is the priesthood of all believers. Now, you will find that the husband is the head of the wife, but you will not find the term that the man is the priest of the home. Interesting. What does that mean? Evidently, she's not a priest. And what does that mean? And on we go. There's all these terms and thoughts and ideas and beliefs that are really wackadoodle. So this is why we're going to be sending you guys out in these groups to discuss these things. And then we're going to come back together and go, what'd you come up with? What? Spiritual covering? What? Where did you get that? And then you go over here and, we believe all the men are the priests of their home. What? and we're going to get together and do this. And just point out just how the real problem exists with us. The real problem, according to what these guys said, is theological. And it's spiritual. There's where the real problem lies. When you don't know what Jesus is about, what the gospel is, and what his vision for the church is, you start creating your own church. You start using language like small groups. And then small groups turn into bowling leagues. I remember my brother, after having a long spin out in drugs and everything, was starting to come back to Christ, and he went to a church and he went to a small group, and he was like, hey, when are we going to maybe read the Bible or something? They're like, we don't do that here. If you want to do that, you go to another small group. Interesting. And that's by one of the biggest churches in America that you would all know if I said the name. Okay? So,
Hey, can I say something?
yes, go ahead.
I'm gonna go.
Oh, you dirty.
I know. I'm gonna say, not that. Of course, we need to be accountable. There needs to be covering.
Yep.
We don't want to go so far the other
Absolutely.
way. We're all Lone Rangers out here, and we're all just to me, the first thing people think of is that when you say,
Yep.
we're the covering.
Okay, so let me read the last thing here, number 7. What have we learned from the millions of believers who have left the church because of hurt and disappointment and because of their expectations were not met and their sense of family and purpose and calling were never found or experienced? There are currently more people in Tucson who identify as Christians but do not gather or commit to any form of church family than those who do. Approximately 150 gather together in one form or another in Tucson, which leaves 450,000 Christians that are lost sheep. They don't gather with any Christians. Ever. They're just, I guess I am the church. And me and Jesus got our own deal. And of course, you know how bad the church is. They're the ones actually bashing the church more than most. It's these people. Because they're hurt. They're disappointed. Their expectations were not met. And so you know the church, but not me. I'm spiritual. Right? This is what we're in. How have these lost sheep become lost? Has the gospel and the ways we evangelize contribute to this? Hey, I don't know you from Adam. What would you like to know Jesus right here and now? Repent. I'm terrified. Okay, what do I got to say? Jesus saves. And then I come to my church. I led another one to Jesus.
Oh, dang.
Oh, I know. It hurts. I know. It hurts. That's a big reason why we got 450,000 people who identify as Christians running around out there like that.
Where do you get word of?
So if you go to the government census in Tucson, there's something like, I can't remember the exact number again. These are random. These are basic numbers. 600 and some thousand, I think it was, that identify as Christian. And as far as all the church statistics go, we estimate there's somewhere around 150,000 people who go to church in some form. So that's where the numbers come from. So if the church is a place where relationships are to be healed and restored, but it then becomes a place where relationships remain surfacey at best and hurtful and broken at worst, what becomes of the church? You got to understand the problem. Do I have a scratch that needs a Band-Aid? Or do I have cancer? Okay? And if it's just a scratch and you act like I got cancer, that's a problem too. So you can't overestimate, you can't underestimate. What's the problem? And how have I contributed to the problem? How have we? We've done that. We've already hurt each other multiple times. Because we don't know. We're in the fog. Because we all grew up in the fog. In fact, most of you, myself included, are kind of lost sheep. And we've just decided we've found some other lost sheep, and it's like, I don't know. Like we're talking about something that maybe gets us found. I mean, I'm not making this up.
Truth seekers.
Because again, I said, right, last week. So what's my commitment to you guys? You have no idea. There are none. If I decide to leave tomorrow, I'm gone. Have I broken any promises? And what about you? We're just a bunch of lost sheep out here in the desert. Hey, are you lost? Yeah, I'm lost too. Let's hang out. Okay? And so again, you could laugh because you have to, but there's much to weep for. There's much brokenness. And you all have experienced it yourself, and you've talked to all kinds of people, and it's like, where do I even begin? Where do I even start? And if we think, oh yeah, we got the answer. You know what the method is? House church. Small church, meet their church, Sunday church, Saturday church. We just meet at nighttime because we're, whatever. No, the problem is theological. We don't know the gospel and we don't know Jesus' vision for the church. And we act like we do. Okay? And then we're not spiritual. We're not truly like Christ. And we don't truly love one another or even know what that looks like. Right? Like, there's a lot of people out there married. A lot of them don't know what marriage is. And it's pretty bad. Again, met with a couple. So tell me, what's the problem? Well, I was in the cartels, 10 years of prison. And as soon as I got out, I got married. Who was she that thought that was a good idea? Okay. And a couple months later, we're pregnant. And we just now had our baby 2 weeks ago. And she's a boxer and so am I. And we like to beat each other up. And I don't know why our marriage is falling apart. Interesting. They got no way. And here's what I said. I know you think that's normal. He thinks it's normal. Because all the relationships you've ever seen, they probably beat each other up. Yeah, this is what marriage is. Don't do that. That ain't normal. Get through one. Here's your disciple to faith moment. Okay, first practice in your following Jesus. Do not lay a finger on your wife for one weekend. That's where it has to start sometimes. And I'll see you on Monday. That's the reality. And if marriages have become that, and the church has a tendency to succumb to the culture, like they did in Rome, so we've done in America. Right? It's easy to look back there and go, yeah, Constantine, how did they not see that? Well, it was the culture. It was the air they breathed. It seemed natural. It seemed normal. It seemed good. Hey, look at all of a sudden we're building church buildings everywhere. Look! God's giving us favor. Look at all the wealth. Oh, the emperor's giving us land too. Look how we can feed the poor with the land. It's good. Interesting. Was it good that they fed some poor with some of that? Sure. Did it come with some hooks? It sure did. And here we are. Well, look at our church. I mean, we did a good thing here. Yep, you did. That was good. Spirit worked. Praise God. Christ in His mercy did a great work through us and in us in that place. But we're beating each other over here. I know, but we're not perfect. And so we accept it as normal. What is the beautiful bride of Christ supposed to look like? A city that's set on a hill, that loves one another as He, here's the standard, as He loved you, so we are to love one another. Now that's going to be layered, because I can't love you all in the exact same way, nor can you me. But that's what it is. So until we get to that standard, we got to recognize, okay, we're still growing. We're not beating ourselves up or anybody else. Like, hey, we're just admitting it's screwed up. And we got a long ways to go. Okay, great. Let's start repenting and seek God and pray together and get excited, because if it's as good as whatever it is now, however good you think it is now, it's only going to get better if we do this. Okay? So that's where we're at.